Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and today is going to be a little bit of a recap here of the 2020 NFL Draft. And look, for non-Eagles fans, this will be a very Eagles-specific podcast. So, you can stick through and you can listen through, or don't go anywhere for the next few weeks, because we'll be back into, full league agnostic over the next couple of weeks. But this week, it's going to be very much what the Eagles did in the 2020 NFL Draft. Next week, we're going to do one of my favorite things. We started this last year, where we're going to basically go pick by pick, and we're going to show all the times that we talked about Jalen Rieger throughout the course of the college football season on this show. We'll hit on that in next week's episode. The week after that, we'll do both day 2 selections, Jalen Hertz and Davion Taylor. The week after that, we're going to do the day 3 selections and the undrafted free agents. So all the guys we got a part of, we're going to have interviews with coaches and with scouts. You do not want to miss that. So make sure you tune in if you're an Eagles fan over the next couple of weeks. If not, don't worry. We're going to have, again, like I said, full NFL draft recaps. We're going to look at all 32 teams, how they did in the draft. We're going to start looking ahead to next year. We've got some big picture conversations. We're going to look back to years ago in the NFL draft. So a lot of big things coming, regardless of whether you're an Eagles fan or not, here on this podcast. So make sure you stay subscribed. I can't tell you how excited I am, too, for the fall, because I've got some big plans ahead for this podcast moving forward. Once the college football season kicks up into high gear, I cannot wait to share them with you guys. Once everything's finalized, I will be sure to do so. The best way to support the show, go to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. That being said, let's cut to the chase here. Let's get now into Draft Buzz. Myself and Chris McPherson and Ben Fennell.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, guys, let's get into it. Let's start at the very top with the Eagles' first-round pick, Jalen Rieger. And, we talked about it on Thursday night, but all three of us really, really excited about the addition of Rieger to this Eagles offense. And, again, we're going to follow a very specific formula. So, as always, I'm here with Ben Fennell and Chris McPherson. Ben is going to take us through the player's skill set. I'll talk about how he could potentially fit in the Eagles scheme and big picture, how he fits into the Eagles roster. And then Cmac will jump in with news, nuggets, anything that we learned about him since he was drafted, just interesting facts about him, and then we'll just kind of round it up and we'll move on to the next guy. So, Ben, we'll start with you. Let's talk one final time on this podcast about Jalen Rieger, his skill set, what you saw from him during your film study.
Yeah, just a really quick elevator speech on the TCU receiver, Jalen Rieger. He's really more of a positionless playmaker is what I call these style of players. He's mostly a wide receiver, but he did some return duties as well, spent some time in the slot, also some gadget duties in the backfield and some wildcat opportunities. But the interesting thing was his usage, only being 5'10", 190 pounds, lined up about 85% of the time outside the numbers. So didn't have a whole lot of usage in the middle of the field and just getting him the ball quickly. I felt TCU could have done a better job with their scheme and philosophy and just getting the ball to him easier rather than always throwing verticals to a small receiver. But he's a guy that wakes up running 4.4. He might even have a better play speed, more like a 4.3 with the ball in his hands. And he's very, very competitive at the catch point, high pointing the ball. Caught a Hail Mary against SMU as a true freshman. Very competitive down in the red zone. So despite his size, he has a very much a alpha type of profile when that ball is in the air, Fran. And he ran 4.29 in the summer on Bruce Feldman's Freak List. This is a guy that I think his play speed is much faster than any sort of metrics that he's put up official times. The one issue or a couple issues with him in his career, the drops, and some of them have been brutal. Some of them have been right in the basket over the middle of the field. But for every one of those, he's made some incredible catches on the sideline or high pointing over a smaller cornerback or even sometimes a bigger cornerback. So very interesting player here, Fran, in the first round.
So when I take a Jalen Rieger and I say, okay, how does he fit into an Eagles offense? You say, okay, this is a player that can line up both inside and outside for Doug Peterson, for Press Taylor, for this entire coaching staff. Say, okay, he can line up really anywhere on the field. I would imagine that they'll try and find creative ways to use him. You're going to see him with all different kinds of backfield actions. Think of all the different things they can do from a jet sweep, orbit motion, all that stuff you put into this, into the bag here for Jalen Rieger. Then you talk about, okay, what kind of routes can he run? I think the whole route tree is open. He can work over the middle of the field. He's shown that ability. He can work vertically. Doug Peterson has always been a big proponent of 3-level stretch concepts to stretch the field vertically. And I think Jalen Rieger can be that guy to take the top off of defense, open things up for some of these players in the middle of the field. Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, even working things open for an Alshon Jeffrey and for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. All of those guys will benefit. Really, to me, the thing that really gets me juiced up is just fitting into this 12 personnel package with a Deshaun Jackson and Jalen Rieger on the outside and the 2 tight ends patrolling the middle of the field, whether they're running from the slot or from in line. Number one, yeah, you're going to create some potential for one-on-one matchups on the outside, okay? Because typically against 12 personnel, you're going to get one safety down closer to the line of scrimmage. That means you have a single high safety, man-to-man, basically, coverage on the outside against the corners. Now, when you've got that kind of speed with Deshaun and Jalen Rieger, that's a lot of stress on those corners. So, yeah, that's going to help those guys. You're going to try and take advantage of those matchups. And if not, if the corners are going to play a little bit softer, or if you're going to play with the safeties to both playing deep away from the line of scrimmage, now you're opening things up in the middle of the field. You're also opening things up for the run game. So, to me, Jalen Rieger really gives this offense a lot of multiplicity in terms of how those guys can be deployed, how they can attack defenses on any given basis. And we'll get into it a little bit later. The Eagles added a lot of speed over the course of the weekend, so we'll touch on some of this stuff. But to me, Jalen Rieger is a guy that can be a really dynamic playmaker in this Eagles offense. I can't wait to see ultimately how he's used. So, Cmac, anything that has come over the last few days that has really stood out to you when it comes to Jalen Rieger?
Well, Fran, I'm going to give you the props here. Really, you need to must listen to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast fueled by Gatorade. Fran, I thought your interviews with TCU head coach Gary Patterson and Eagles wide receivers coach Aaron Moorhead were very, very enlightening when it comes to Rieger. From Moorhead, they go way back because Moorhead and Jalen's dad, Monte Rieger, played together in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts. So Aaron has known Jalen since he was a young man and, in fact, tried to recruit him to Texas Tech in college. So he's been following Rieger's career all through high school, all through college, and finally it just comes full circle where they're together in the NFL. And one of the many interesting things I should say that Moorhead had about Rieger was the fact that because Rieger is such a physical freak, he's a gym fanatic, loves to be in the weight room, you don't have to worry about that transition in terms of getting off press. He's going to be plenty explosive, plenty strong. So he already has that advantage coming to the NFL. There'll be some adjustments, playing in those spread offenses in the Big 12, but those are things that Aaron Moorhead said he's very confident that he can be able to work with on Rieger when it comes to route running and the finer details of the position. But, in terms of his physical development, he's so much further ahead than most typical NFL rookie receivers. And Patterson, to your point, Ben, a few moments ago, saying why did they make it so hard to get him touches? Gary Patterson admitted we didn't do him justice. And largely that was because of the quarterback play they've had the last 2 seasons on campus. So he thinks that his ceiling is a lot higher. And the biggest thing for Patterson is that he and the other TCU alums are going to be on Rieger's case because Patterson said, look, we want the Eagles to keep drafting our guys. So we're going to want to keep pushing our guys to succeed at the next level. Just because they're not Horned Frogs anymore doesn't mean that we're going to stop caring about them. So you've seen the success with guys like Big V and Matt Pryor coming on strong at the end of last year. The Eagles have had success with some TCU guys of late, and they want to keep it going, especially with the first-round investment in Jalen Rieger.
How about Gary Patterson pulling the Jason Phillips card out of the bag too? Blew me away. No, I think I thought that the interview, the chat with Gary Patterson was really awesome, and he really. I was interested to get his thoughts because he's a defensive coach, one of the better defensive minds in all of college football. So just kind of getting his sense of all right when a team lines up with those 2 tight ends on the field, and you've got that speed on either side with Deshaun and Rieger. His response, I thought, really kind of illuminated everything.
I'm just glad they had video on that, Fran, because you could see his face, like that defensive mind, like, 12 personnel with speed, like, geez, well, we got to get an extra hat in the box, and I guess we're man-to-man. You could almost see the angst on his face.
Exactly right. No, it was a really fun discussion. So make sure, if you haven't already, make sure you go check that out over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, let's get to round 2. The Eagles making a selection here that surprised a lot of people with quarterback Jalen Hertz. Ben, we'll go to you for the skill set.
Yeah, Jalen Hertz, obviously a competitive winner everywhere he's gone. 3 years at Alabama, 1 year at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley system there. Obviously, the whole trials and tribulation playing with Tua Tagovailoa and Tua taking over in overtime and winning the championship, and then Jalen having to take over for Tua the next year against Georgia in the SEC championship. Can't say enough about this kid off the field. But as far as on the field, what he does, he makes a lot of throws out of structure, makes a lot of plays out of structure with his legs. He's a really dynamic athlete. I thought showing up to the combine, running 4.59 and really looking some of his more polished passing at the combine, I thought, in Indianapolis. But some of his issues as a passer is just the timing, the anticipation, his willingness to play within rhythm and get that ball out quick. He likes to play a little bit more backyard football, a little bit more 7-on-7, likes the spacing systems and to run around a little bit. So not sure he has the full acclimate of a pocket passing quarterback in the NFL, but in combination with his playmaking ability, his athleticism, his leadership, his intangibles, his off the field, really, really interesting player and a guy that I don't think you can pass up having in your locker room.
Yeah, no question. I mean, everything that he brings from an intangible standpoint, you love. And I just feel, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have been one of those people that were like, man, like, I just don't know how he's going to project to the NFL. We've seen time and time and time again, guys that have this mobility come into the league. You look over the last couple of seasons, 2, 3, 4 years, whether you're talking Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, you keep going down and down the list. Dak Prescott, certainly one of those guys. You come in a little, and maybe you're a little bit raw as a passer early, but you can be a creator. You can be a guy that can create outside of structure. And this is not someone that has to step in and play right away, obviously, with Carson Wentz already in tow. But when you look at Jalen Hertz, and I look at this coaching staff, right? You look at Doug Peterson, you look at Rich Scangarello, you look at Press Taylor, you look at Marty Mornhinweg. These are guys that have had history of working with mobile quarterbacks, getting guys outside the pocket either by design or outside of structure, and working those guys to have high levels of success. Marty Mornhinweg has worked with Lamar Jackson and Michael Vick. Rich Scangarello comes from that Shanahan scheme of getting quarterbacks out on the move off the boot action. I think that those are all things that when you look at Jalen Hertz, he can thrive in that kind of a situation, in that kind of a system. So when you look at, at Jalen Hertz, you say, okay, can he be Dak Prescott? I feel like he can be that level of player. He needs a lot of development for sure. But when you look at this scheme and how they can try and utilize him as a passer, that for sure comes to mind. And then we've talked about the athleticism as well as he's, enacting the role as a backup quarterback. Now you can try and leverage his athleticism in other ways and try and get creative with them and do some other things as well. So to me, Jalen Hertz, really, really intriguing option. Cmac, we'll go to you now in terms of some of the things we've learned about Jalen since Friday night.
Well, here's a quote from Press Taylor, the team's passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach. This is from last spring, and he was asked about, what's kind of the next development of quarterback play in the NFL, and this was his quote: "I do think at some point one of the big things is having multiple people on the field who can throw the ball. I think that's something you'll see going forward. You've seen kind of the Philly special, all the different versions of double passes, things like that. I think at some point like that I could see coming into play." So it's very interesting that last summer, Press Taylor is on the record as saying that, and then fast forward to now the Eagles using the second-round pick on Jalen Hertz. I think the biggest thing is they love the intangibles. They love the success he's had in college, but they know that he can come in and Fran, you touched on this, and be a good teammate. They want to strengthen that room and make that room from top to bottom as deep and as talented as possible. So that's the big thing. And, obviously catching a lot of people by surprise, but the Eagles not afraid to do things different. They're not risk averse, and they realize that they're trying to protect the investment of this football team. They're trying to make it the best team that it possibly can be. And we noted over the weekend on the Journey to Draft day 2 recap, I should say, just how important the backup quarterback position has been over the years. So it'll be very interesting that once they get on the field, how they utilize, how they develop Jalen Hertz. But there's so much for the coaching staff, and it's a very, very good coaching staff when it comes to quarterbacks. Fran, you mentioned, the work bringing on Marty Mornhinweg and what he's done in recent years. They've done such good work with quarterbacks over the years that They wanted to get a guy. They didn't want to wait till day 3. They saw Jalen Hertz as their guy, and they made the move to get him, even though it came to the surprise of many people who are Eagles fans and people overall in the NFL world.
So let's go to the third round, and you go to the very end, almost the very end of round 3 for Colorado linebacker Davion Taylor. Ben, we'll go to you. One of the most athletic players in the linebacking group in this draft. Give us an idea of how you view his skill set after you've studied him on film.
He is a really interesting player, raw prospect, obviously not playing in high school and still kind of getting his feet under him after this 2 years in JUCO. Played a variety of positions in Colorado. I would not say that Mel Tucker's defense out there is really a pro-style transitional defense there. A huge kind of spacing systems. He played out in no man's land. He was a halfway player, halfway between a safety and a linebacker, that nickel Sam position where you're hanged out over the slots. You're not really a box player, but he's a guy that can run to the sideline, make plays from the backside, chase plays from behind. He's not shy about sticking his nose into the fire, but that really isn't what his skill set is. He's only 6 foot, 225. He's a little bit undersized. What he's going to do is hang his hat on special teams and be a sub-package player. And he just seems like that perfect Jim Schwartz type of mold, like a Nate Gary or Kamo Gruza-Hill, the safety linebacker hybrid, where at the very end of the day, they're going to come be a core 4 special teams player for you. Probably a little bit more of a sub-package pedigree with his size and lack of physicality. But what he does, he has track speed every day. And I think we're going to see that sideline to sideline and even chasing some plays down like he did this past year, running Oregon running back CJ Verdell down about 70 yards. So he's not shy about showing off that speed any chance he gets.
To me, I think when you look at Taylor, you mentioned a bunch of these guys that have come through this system and have had success as a starting linebacker. You mentioned Nate Gary. You mentioned Kamo Gruza-Hill. There have been a lot of other guys that have come through that have been, on the undersized side, and those guys had safety backgrounds. Nate Gary was a safety at Nebraska. Kamo Gruza-Hill, a safety at Eastern Illinois. I think when you look at Davion Taylor, I talked with his defensive coordinator over the weekend, and he said, yeah, the role that he played in that scheme, if you go back to Mel Tucker for all the places he coached in the SEC, that was a defensive back playing in that role. Not a linebacker, but with his skill set, we were able to play him there and still be able to have that multiplicity on defense. And we asked him to do all kinds of different things. He's a really smart kid. They're not worried about his ability to pick anything up. Look, he's certainly a player that's going to need a little bit of time, considering the amount of reps that he hasn't had over the course of his career playing football. But I think overall, you're talking about, again, what we harped on over the weekend. Great athlete, not good athlete, great, phenomenal athlete with sideline-to-sideline speed, outstanding range, and high character. So you're banking that he's going to be able to reach that ceiling. Davion Taylor, very, very intriguing player.
So, Fran, my comp for Davion, and I don't know if this is going to excite fans or not, but my comp was actually Darren Lee, who's a first-round pick out of Ohio State, who ran 4.4, played a very similar nickel Sam position, kind of out in space there. And he got to the NFL and was a little bit of a fish out of water trying to make him a will linebacker. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they try to transition him into the NFL game and where do you think you can use his skill set. Right now, I think it's more of a sub-package presence. You want to get him in space, and he's a really sneaky blitzer. He gets from A to B in a hurry, obviously, with that speed, and is an explosive player. So I think he has some traits, but don't rely on him being a down-to-down, 3-down linebacker just yet.
Yeah, just to start things off, for sure. Cmac, what have you learned about Davion Taylor over the last few days?
Well, the biggest thing, and Howie Roseman said this, is that the Eagles need to get more athletic at the second level of the defense, and certainly accomplish that by getting Davion Taylor. And we'll talk about Sean Bradley, of course, later on in the podcast. But with Davion Taylor, though, Ben, you talked about the versatility, that buff linebacker position, which is like a hybrid outside backer safety type position. So he has that versatility that he can be a matchup weapon. He's not going to be someone who's going to be a liability in coverage as teams try to come up with one-on-one matchups at the next level. So that's huge for this team. You mentioned a lot of the intangibles already, Fran, but the discipline is going to be one that I'll cite here. He was at Coahoma Community College, a JUCO program after high school because he needed that on-field football experience after playing basically one game in high school due to his religious beliefs. And Taylor was already rated as the top JUCO linebacker after his first year. He committed to Colorado, but Colorado was worried that other big-time programs might come in with offers because he still had another year of JUCO. But more importantly, his mother was worried about Davion because Coahoma in Mississippi, not in the greatest of areas, not great influences in that area. So they really made sure that Davion was disciplined. He stayed in his work. He focused on what he had to do on the field, basically almost treat it like a business, a job where you got to get your football done, get your schoolwork done, and that's pretty much it. If you're focused on getting to the SEC or getting to Colorado, getting to the college level, that this is what you have to do, and he was able to accomplish that. So you talked about already, Fran, that, bright kid, hard worker, add the discipline to that and what he's overcome to get to this point. And all in all, a very intriguing high upside pick here for the Eagles in the third round.
I think he was the first player I spoke with at Media Day at the Senior Bowl, and I was just so impressed by him. And one last point on him, Ross Tucker brought this up on Eagles Draft Central over the weekend, and I thought it was a great point. I'm pretty sure I said it on the recap show on Friday night, but when you talk about a guy, he didn't play high school football in any games. He played one game over the course of his career, but the fact that he still practiced every day, every week throughout the course of his career, despite not playing in games, that speaks to his work ethic. That speaks to his toughness and his love for the game, all that stuff. To me, like that's really impressive. I didn't even think about that part of it from that end of it, but really, really good point there by Ross Tucker over the weekend. All right, let's go to the next one here. To start day 3, the guy that I was most excited about, I highlighted him on the pre-draft show, on Saturday morning. Safety, Kayvon Wallace from Clemson. Ben, let's go to you. We've talked a lot about Kayvon over the course of the college football season, certainly during the pre-draft process. Give us the elevator speech on his skill set.
Yeah, one of the easier evals of this whole draft cycle. A guy we've been crushing on for about 2 years now, it feels like, out there in Clemson. A guy that I've seen in person 4 times over the last 4 years. He just has this makeup that he's going to be that 12 to 15-year NFL veteran who Dabo Swinney has called his Swiss Army knife to the defense, whether he's a corner or a nickel or a slot guy or a safety or a free safety or a box linebacker. This guy wore a lot of hats for Brent Venables and that Clemson defense. Can do a lot of things in the NFL, especially in a sub-package fit there. Was an all-state player coming out of the state of Virginia on both sides of the ball, which we really love having that receiver pedigree with our defensive backs. He's tough. He's a hard hitter. He's an extremely secure tackler, and that will typically get you playing time on any defense on Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays, and that's what you want out of safeties on the back end, reliable tackling. Now, his issue is coming into this season, people didn't think he had the production on the ball, and he really didn't. But this year, he kind of put that to bed with 10 PBUs. He only had 5 coming into the year. He also had 2 interceptions. So, obviously, he's been taking on more of a full-time role the past 2 years as they've had the changing of the guard and the secondary out there. But he's a guy that didn't wow you at the combine. He ran 4.53, jumped 38 inches in the vert, 11.1 broad. None of those really wow you, but collectively, it was a solid workout for a safety nickel player. In combination with his experience, the Senior Bowl, the whole deal, this is a guy you just want on your roster in your defensive back row. I've comped him to Tony Jefferson, Antoine Bethea, any of those blue-collar 12-year NFL veteran safeties. I just think he has that type of pedigree.
Earlier today, we're recording this late Tuesday afternoon, early Tuesday evening, and earlier today I caught up with Clemson safeties coach Mickey Kahn, and we just talked about Kayvon and what he meant to that defense and his skill set. And he obviously raved about it. We're going to hear about this interview a little bit. But to me, we had this conversation about how he's kind of one of those positionless players. We've talked about that on this podcast. We've talked about it on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast as well this offseason with this transformation of the Eagles secondary. All these guys that can mix and match and play different roles and do different things. It's great to be able to have all these guys because now you go into a game plan. You've got answers for whatever the offense wants to try and throw at you, regardless of body type and athletic ability and all the different levels of skill set. You've got answers in terms of what you have defensively on the back 7. So Kayvon Wallace certainly fits that role. You mentioned all the different hats that he wore in that defense. I think you can kind of plug him in early on and say, okay, if the Eagles go with a heavy defensive package, like a big dime, you feel like he could work his way onto the field in that kind of scenario. Could he be the slot corner? Yeah, I would say that's on the table for sure. This is a guy that can line up and play a number of different roles for the secondary, kind of similar to like Avonte Maddox in terms of, at any given point, is he the nickel? Is he an outside corner? Is he the safety? What can he do? I think the same thing with Kayvon Wallace in this defense. You want to continue adding guys that have those versatile skill sets. So, Cmac, we'll come to you to kind of wrap things up here for Kayvon.
I think the big thing with Kayvon is he helped turn that program around at Clemson. And everyone's going to talk about Deshaun Watson and the great quarterback play and, the number of top picks they've had. But Kayvon Wallace went there and played in 3 national championship games. They won twice there at Clemson during his time there. What's fascinating about Wallace was his dream was originally to go to Ohio State. And he was actually set to commit to Cincinnati just a couple of weeks before his national signing day. But he posted on Huddle and on Twitter an update of his highlights. And in like a 3-week span, all these big-time programs came out of the woodwork, including Ohio State. So he thought, oh, this is it. My dream's going to come true. But he went to visit the campus and just didn't have the connection with the coaches. It didn't go the way that he had dreamed of. But he had that connection with Dabo Swinney and the coaches at Clemson, and that basically is what turned everything around. So he was someone who was set to go to a mid-major school, ended up going to Clemson, and helps turn that into the powerhouse program that it is today.
Yeah, you're talking about a guy that's just got such a fun skill set. Cannot wait to see how he's used here in Philadelphia this fall and beyond. Let's go to the next pick here. Jack Driscoll, the right tackle from the Auburn Tigers. I talked with Gus Malzahn earlier this week. You can check that out here in a couple weeks here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. But Jack Driscoll, Ben, excited to get your take here on the skill set of the right tackle for the last 2 years for Auburn.
Yeah, he was a guy that caught our eye, coincidentally, watching their left tackle that we'll talk about in a couple of picks here. But Jack Driscoll is a really interesting tackle. He's a UMass transfer coming from Connecticut. He reminds me a lot of Ezra Cleveland coming out of Boise State, who started to get a lot of buzz late into the draft cycle and into even back end of round 1 buzz. But Jack, for some reason, didn't have that same type of buzz. But they're similar looking players, similar type of skill set. They rely on athleticism, quickness, play ID. They do not have the length. They don't have the play strength. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they can survive out on the edge in NFL or if they're going to have to kick into guard there. But he's a really interesting player. I thought he did a really good job when he has to pull out to the perimeter and ID blockers or defenders on the move. He's really good with stunts and twists. It seems like he really understands the game. The game is never too fast for him. He's not on the ground a whole lot. Let's just see if we can get him stronger with an NFL program.
Yeah, I think when you look at Jack Driscoll, you look at his athleticism, and I think you look at his potential versatility as well. We know that the Eagles value versatility along the offensive line, not just in their backups, but with their starters as well. All these linemen they've brought in over the last few years have all had that ability to slide and play a number of different positions, and I think that Jack Driscoll has done that throughout his career as well. He played right tackle as a starter, but at left tackle in practice, and also earlier in his career at UMass, started at left tackle and started at left guard. Gus Malzahn told me he actually even took some snaps at center in practice as well. So you're talking about a guy who's got the ability to play any position along the offensive line, and that versatility is huge for a guy, especially to be active on game day. So you're talking at the very least a guy that could be a swing backup moving forward. I really like Jack Driscoll on tape. Cmac, what have you learned about Jack Driscoll over the last few days?
The versatility is a big thing. You mentioned how Gus Malzahn mentioned the potential, where he took snaps at center, and Harry Roseman thinks that Driscoll could be a backup potentially at all 5 positions up and down the line, showcasing the versatility very much like Isaac Seumalo, who was fitting as a very, very good left guard for this football team. But going back to his rookie year, played up and down the offensive line. Big thing with Driscoll is, he really bet on himself when he went from UMass to Auburn, but in a short time on campus there, won over his teammates, earned a starting offensive tackle position, and just really, really showcased that he belonged on playing in the biggest conference in college football. So basically, once again, you look at someone with high intangibles, but, you mentioned that the Eagles really cover versatility, especially with the reserve linemen. The Eagles right now pretty well set with Lane Johnson at right tackle and Andre Dillard set to take the reins at left tackle. But, you want to make sure you have some versatility and some depth there, especially after losing someone like Big V, Halapuli Vaitai, this season, who signed with the Lions.
So let's go to the next selection here. That's Boise State wide receiver John Hightower. The Eagles go with some more speed on the perimeter. Ben, let's get your scouting report of Hightower. We've been talking about him through the fall as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite players on day 3 in this draft. I'm glad the Eagles got him. He's a 4'4" receiver. He's 6'1", 183, so kind of an undersized frame, but he's an absolute speed demon. I like they've found him a variety of ways to get the ball, not just down the field with double moves and vertical speed, but also the horizontal game as well with jet sweeps and end arounds and some yards after catch opportunities. He's not a guy that's going to break a whole lot of tackles with his physicality or his contact balance, but he's really dynamic in the open field to take away angles, and was really impressed with his route running. I think he has that extra gear. He knows how to manipulate his speeds and to attack leverages, really strong getting in at a break to the top of the route. And when he needs to get to that speed right away and there's no press coverage in front of him, like the Eagles like to do with those tight splits, man, he can get up to top speed instantly. And it's a lot of fun to watch him. He's had 12 plays of 40 yards or more the last 2 seasons. So he's a big play waiting to happen. And he did it this year with a true freshman. He did it last year with a 5th-year senior. So he's a guy that's seen it all as far as the quarterback position. Really dynamic athlete on the outside.
And I think when you talk about Hightower, this is a guy that you can line up outside the numbers, get him vertical, let him work in space, and stretch the defense down the field. And he's got that skill set. I talked with his offensive coordinator, Eric Kisei, this week. Raved about him off the field and said he's one of the smartest guys they had on their roster, had the ability to pick up not just every position at the receiver position, and they did move him inside at times to try and create matchups in the slot. But he said that there were times where, look, they gave him a wildcat package. He would play quarterback, but they'd be in the meeting room, and he'd be calling out plays as if he were the quarterback before the snap, calling things out. So just a really, really smart, cerebral player, very competitive player. Notably, Eric Kisei also coached Deshaun Jackson at Cal his first year, recruited Deshaun to Cal. So I talked with him about just the comparison between those two players. So make sure you go check that interview out as soon as that's posted, coming up on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. But Hightower, I think, has that speed to be able to be used down the field. Again, you're talking about someone who can stretch the defense in those 3-level stretch concepts, all those different vertical concepts that the Eagles have worked in their passing game. I think Hightower works really, really well in that way. And then obviously all the backfield action stuff, all the different horizontal ways you can work him as well. I think Hightower, with that speed, I think it could do a lot of different things in this Eagles offense. Cmac, what have you learned about John Hightower over the last few days?
Well, you talk about the speed. How about this number for you? 17.6 yards per catch in his college career. Just simply outstanding, especially when you compare it to all the other top receivers in this year's draft class. But this is a guy who loves going fast on the field and loves speed off the field, loves cars, loves dirt bikes. So speed is kind of a common theme throughout his life, but something that really changed him was the murder of a very close friend. It's actually just a little over a year ago at this point, and he has a tattoo, "Long Live Slim," on his arm. And if you ever watch his touchdown celebrations, he'll point to his bicep and then point to the sky. And that's a tribute to his friend. He also has the words "Long Live Slim" on his car as well. So that's something that kind of really served as a wake-up call, realizing that he had such a great opportunity here to make it to the NFL. And I'm sure that he had to be thinking a lot about his friend on draft night just a couple nights ago.
Yeah, I think the next one we'll move on to a great story there from John Hightower for sure. Next one we'll talk about here, Sean Bradley, Temple made. So I'm really happy about this pick. So I think you look at the Temple linebacker, Sean Bradley, guy who's got size and speed. See, Ben, let's get you the scouting report. What did you see from Sean Bradley on film?
Yeah, Sean Bradley back on Broad Street. Good to have that in Philadelphia sports here, coming over from Rancocas Valley in New Jersey. Prominent high school, Franco Harris, Irving Fryer, Alonzo Spellman, 3 first-round picks in the NFL from this public high school. But Sean Bradley played a variety of sports, track, basketball, played both ways on the football team. He's been a 3-year starter for the Temple Owls over there. Got the single digit. He's a Temple tough player, and you have to earn those single digit numbers. They don't just hand that out. The interesting thing with him is he's an undersized linebacker. He relies on foot speed. I thought he showed up to the combine, put together a really good performance, running 4.51 at 235 pounds. Interesting thing is, looking at his background and what he can do for you, they gave him handoffs on offense, Fran, including a couple fake punt opportunities. He's a really dynamic athlete. I'm not willing to say he's just a linebacker at the next level. I think he could do a lot of things for you. Some of the issues, because of that undersized frame, he doesn't have the length, doesn't have long arms. Occasionally, offensive linemen can get up on him, and he really can't get off those blocks. He's not a stack shed guy. He's a guy that's going to beat you with play ID and foot speed. And that's okay. There's a place for that in the NFL too. But he's a guy that's extremely tough. He's definitely going to hang his hat on special teams early in his career, and we'll see how the game slows down for him in Jim Schwartz's defense.
I talked with Temple head coach Rod Carey this week. He gave me two nuggets here. One, he said Sean Bradley, the best leader that he's ever been around. And two, that he's the new age Mike. Like he is, he's 230 pounds, whereabout, but with his athleticism, his ability to make plays sideline to sideline, he views him as a guy that's built to play as a 3-down player in today's league. Now, to me, when you look at Sean Bradley, it's similar in ways to what we talk about with Davion Taylor, right? You've got two guys that have high athleticism traits, and you've got the high intangibles as well. Not everybody in this class is going to make it. The Eagles double-dipped at linebacker. They triple-dipped at receiver. They double-dipped on the offensive line. So when you're trying to figure out, okay, how many cracks at the apple can you get, some of these guys are going to work. Some of these guys aren't. You get two guys that have similar skill sets. You throw them into the barrel with all the guys you already have on the roster. Let's let the best man win. Let's have all these guys compete this summer. And I think when you look at Sean Bradley, he has a very, very intriguing skill set. To me, is built to play in this system as well. Even though he's a little bit undersized, I liked him between the tackles. I liked him coming downhill. He showed the ability to work in traffic. So Sean Bradley, very, very intriguing player, especially at that point in the draft. Cmac, any news or any little nuggets here that we've got from Sean Bradley over the last couple of days?
Well, the big thing I think you already touched on, Fran, the leadership. Rod Carey talking about just one of the best leaders. He doesn't know if he'll ever have another leader in that program to the caliber of Bradley's, the experience, 50 career games for the Temple Tough Owls. But he has an advocate in former Eagles linebacker Barry Garner, who's his agent. And, of course, Barry Garner was with the Eagles, was a teammate of Doug Pearson's in 1999, came on in that draft class, was a second-round pick in the Donovan McNabb class. And, Barry has basically advised him throughout the process of what it would be like to play in Philadelphia. Obviously, Sean knows from going to Temple and growing up in South Jersey, but still definitely different when you're actually playing for the team and the attention and adulation that you'll get from the fans. But Barry Garner has gone to bat for him, for the team, has gone to Coach Pearson to vouch for the quality person, leader that he is. So like you said, Fran, just important that they got volume in this draft class and you increase the competition so that, all right, some of these guys might not work out, but you are certainly going to make the guys who do make the roster that much better. And there's no question that linebacker will be really a lot of these positions, and we'll talk about this on the other podcast down the line, are going to be fun. Hopefully we'll get to see that all unfold in training camp sometime soon.
Yeah, no question. And I mentioned that the Eagles triple-dipped at wide receiver, the final one that they selected in the draft, Quez Watkins from Southern Miss. Ben, I know you were very intrigued by what you had seen from Watkins during your film study. Tell us about his skill set.
Well, I put together a list of day 3 speed options, not thinking the Eagles are going to grab 2 of them. Literally the first 2 on the list. They got John Hightower and Quez Watkins. Hightower running a 4.44 at the combine. Quez Watkins turning heads with a 4.35 in Indianapolis a couple months ago.
Laser 4.35.
No question. That's a legit 4.35. And that's exactly what this guy does, is takes the top off the defense, explosive speed. He's a downfield threat. Impressive tracking, adjustments, and body control, considering his size and speed. Sometimes those explosive speed guys have trouble throttling down and finding the ball, but I was really impressed with the way he finds the ball. Extremely competitive at the catch point, will high point the ball, he'll fight for the ball, he'll come back to the ball, fearless over the middle. And the interesting thing is he's 6 foot 185. He's very much in the Deshaun Jackson, John Hightower mold. He's not a big guy, but he plays bigger. He wasn't given as many yards after catch opportunities as John Hightower with the jets and the screen opportunities. He was much more of a down the field threat, but he did it really well. He had 64 catches this year and averaged 18.4 a catch. So he's a guy that's going to be the big play guy over the top. He had 9 catches of 40-plus yards this year alone. So he's a guy like a Travis Benjamin, like a Will Fuller, that is just going to be able to run for you and take the top off the defense, which I think has a place on most football fields, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday.
So I don't want to be repetitive here. A lot of the things I said about John Hightower and certainly Jalen Rieger, I think apply to Quez Watkins. There's one other aspect of this, but I want to save it for a little bit down the line when we get to the undrafted free agents. So, Cmac, I'm going to quickly punt this one off to you. Anything that you've learned about Quez Watkins here over the last couple of days?
Well, you go back to the production. I know Ben touched on the explosive plays, but he missed 2 games to start the season and yet still had over 1,000 yards receiving and 19 plays of 20-plus yards. Just incredible production despite the missed time. Now, he was off campus back in the spring. He had to get his grades up to snuff. He had to go to a junior college, and that time away really matured him. And the thing that impressed the team when he came back and qualified to be on the squad for fall camp was he didn't lose an ounce of the athleticism, that they could tell that he was working hard, that they realized that, you know what, football was taken away from him. You know, that didn't slow him down, that didn't become a detriment, that allowed him to push through and really thrive in his final season there at Southern Miss. The very interesting thing is a lot of these guys that we've talked about have track backgrounds. Quez Watkins said that he wasn't a track guy, that he has just over the years worked on his technique to use that natural athleticism. But Ben, you talked about this, how some track guys have, struggle with throttling their speeds, changing it up, that they're just straight line runners all the time. Quez Watkins has really taken to learning those finer points so that while he's not the natural track athlete out there, he has that speed as a weapon, but he knows how to utilize it to keep defenses off balance.
That's kind of funny. I'd like to hear the tone of that. Like, I'm not a track athlete. I'm just really fast. All right, that's cool.
The other interesting thing is, going back to how the Eagles double dipped and triple dipped in this case, or really you could say quadruple dipped because of the Marquise Goodwin trade. But it's the fact that Harry Roseman said that when they got to Hightower's pick, really it was between Hightower and Watkins. They were very similarly graded, so that when they came around again, there was such a consensus in the room to be like, look, we felt really good about Quez Watkins as well. Let's get him and let's just add to the competition. So, they felt like that if speed, especially at wide receiver, was the weakness for the team in 2019, well, why don't we make that a strength here and let the competition unfold? So they really emphasized the speed, and boy, oh boy, that wide receiver competition. And even Watkins said in his press conference, it's going to be up-tempo with all these 4-2, 4-3 guys flying down the field. Carson Wentz is going to have fun laying out the deep ball to these guys.
And Fran, really quick, I don't think it should be overlooked that young Quez Watkins and young John Hightower and young even Jalen Rieger, who plays like a 4-3 receiver, have Marquise Goodwin, a track athlete in 6-7 years in the NFL, and Deshaun Jackson to learn from in the same receiver room, who Deshaun Jackson is the king of kings of going deep in the NFL. He is the over-the-top PhD in the NFL. I think he has the all-time leader in 40 and 50-yard receptions. So all those nuances on attacking leverages and all those tricks of the trade that Deshaun Jackson, I know, can convey to those young guys, I just think that's so important to have that leadership and that presence in the same room.
Am I right in saying, Cmac, that it was Darius Slay that tweeted over the weekend, like, man, I got to make sure my hammies are ready to go for the summer.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was an outstanding tweet from Darius Slay. All right, let's get to the next pick here, guys. Another offensive lineman, Prince Tegawanogo. Ben, you referenced him earlier, the left tackle from Auburn. Tell us what you saw from him on film over the course of your study.
Man, he was a tough one, Fran. I swear he was in some first-round mocks over the summer.
Yeah,
he had a lot of buzz coming into the season. When you just look at him and you look at him at practice at Auburn, which I was able to do a couple Auburn games for the past couple of years, this guy looks like he was built in a lab for the left tackle. He's the perfect size, a perfect frame, perfect shoulders, length, butt, proportions, everything. He's just extremely raw of a tackle. So he grew up in Nigeria. He's a little bit late to kind of American culture. He played swimming and soccer and basketball over there in Nigeria, which you could see that in his light feet and the feet quickness. He's just so raw with all his tools, his hand placement, his strides and his kick steps, his reacting to counter moves. A little bit of short arms for his really long frame, but he's pretty much the body type that you want for any NFL tackle. Just doesn't really stay latched to blocks, doesn't have that kind of nasty edge. You just want more out of this kid. He just looks like he's built perfectly for you. Now you just need to refine the technique. So I'm really interested to see what Jeff Stoutland can do with this guy. And, there's very few guys that are better than Jeff Stoutland in developing young talent.
And when you talk about his, just how raw he is at the position, when you look at, his background, he arrived there as a defensive end out of high school. I mean, he was a defensive lineman in high school, got to Auburn, was a defensive lineman. They said, you know what, we want this guy on the other side of the ball. Let's convert him to offense. And that was that. But I think when you look at Prince Tega Wanogho, the tools are there. It's a matter of just harnessing all that untapped potential. And as you mentioned, Jeff Stoutland, one of the best in the business at doing just that. I think when you look at Prince Tega Wanogho, he's got the athletic traits that fit into the scheme. He's got some scheme versatility as well. Only played tackle for the Tigers, but a lot of people feel he could come inside and play some guard. He certainly can go over and play some right tackle as well. So I think when you look at Tega Wanogho, this is a guy that a lot of people very, very high on his ceiling. So Eagles excited to be able to get him. He missed.
And Fran, real quick, not to overlook this. I mean, just hanging out at the left tackle in the SEC, he's allowed 1 sack the last 2 years combined at left tackle in the SEC. I don't care who you are at tackle, 1 sack to your name, you're doing something right. So I just want to see him really improve his technique and to see maybe he can be that swing tackle for the Eagles.
Yeah, certainly a very, very intriguing player. Cmac, thoughts on Prince Tega Wanogho?
The big thing, Ben touched on his amazing backstory, how he came over originally to a prep school to play basketball and then, trying to get, used to American life, went out to make friends on the football team and, was brought on and only played 1 year of high school football before going to Auburn. But, the thing with him is you talked about the athleticism, the production he had at Auburn. Why didn't he go higher? I think the medical concern could have come into play here.
Yep.
He did have a knee injury that he dealt with in his final year at Auburn. He played through it. You mentioned Ben only gave up 1 sack, so still played at a high level. Went to the Senior Bowl, was all set to go, but then was given a medical red flag and not allowed to compete, which made Prince very upset because he was looking forward to proving his wares, in front of all 32 teams. Unfortunately, that injury kept him also from competing in the combine as well. So he actually said during his press conference, he's probably about 85 to 90% recovered. Harry Roseman said that the medical staff and training staff felt very good about the knee, that he'll be able to come back from it. So they signed off on the move. So hopefully the Eagles here taking a late round flyer on a potential, high upside. You talked about the athleticism, the importance of the tackle position, especially the blind side there. They need to figure out the long-term depth solution there, behind Andre Dillard and behind Lane Johnson as well. So they got to figure and sort that out. So, it's really just a high, what do you say? Not a low risk reward. It's a, could be high reward, low risk proposition here for the Eagles.
Yeah, I think too, when you just talk about his potential, like we're talking about, again, guys with high upside, but with high intangibles. It's a really easy bet to make. Last guy here, and you can say the same thing about Casey Toole, the last selection here for the Eagles in the 7th round, out of Stanford, just a 1.5-year starter, only 17 starts under his belt at outside linebacker for the Cardinal. But Ben, what have you seen in those 17 starts?
Well, I saw a lot of things, Fran. I don't really know what to call him, whether I want to call him a Will or a Sam linebacker or even a defensive end. He reminds me a lot of Ty Summers that came out of TCU last year, played a variety of positions all around the box on defense. You don't really know what he is. He's 6'4", I think about just a shade under 250.
Yep. Showed up
to Indianapolis and tested pretty well across the board. Now we just need to figure out what his positional fit is. We had him listed as an edge. 6'4", 250 is not going to survive most edges in the NFL. Now just seeing where do we play him. We know he's going to have the special teams upside. He's probably a base linebacker. Can he carve out maybe a backup Mike role, or can we put 10, 15 pounds on him and make him a sub rusher? So I think he could do a lot of things well. He's a really tough player, and he tested really well. He's an athlete. And I think that's what you do with 7th round picks. You get guys with good upside, good athleticism, tough players, smart kids, experienced kids from programs like Stanford. That's just a perfect 7th round pick to fill out your roster.
To me, I think you look at him and you say, okay, like all the different things that the Eagles could potentially do with Jannard Avery this summer, that they could do, that they did with Joe Osman last summer. I think you look at Casey Toole and say, okay, you could try and use him in some similar different ways. I thought with Stanford, he was excellent with stunts and twists, did a really good job of getting home there and pressuring the quarterback. Athletic kid. He's got good length. He's 33.5-inch arms for a guy who's 6'4". He's 250 pounds. He ran in the low 4.6s. So this is a guy, I agree with you, that he can run down, be a factor on special teams, high character kid. I talked over the weekend, with you guys about how I really enjoyed my conversation with him out in Indianapolis at the Combine. So Casey Toole, certainly a guy, this is the kind of guy you take a swing on late in the 7th round. Cmac.
I think really quick, Fran, I think very similar to the trajectory of TJ Edwards last year. Very similar, a little bit different positionally. But as far as their buzz and their stock and their trajectory, very similar to TJ Edwards coming out of Wisconsin, a veteran, played a lot of snaps there. And I just think a guy like Casey Toohill is going to turn heads during camp and probably have 10, 15 tackles in one of these preseason games.
C-Mac, let's go over to you. What have you learned about Casey Toole?
I think you guys touched on just the intangibles. The character is just simply outstanding. Finalist for the academic Heisman, wants to go to business school and do nonprofit work. Talked about working in California with the homeless, and has already given some thought in terms of what he would want to do when he gets to Philadelphia. But you mentioned the athleticism of the pass rushers, the edge rushers who tested at the Combine. He was the most athletic. And here's a quote from head coach David Shaw. It kind of sums up for him. From the moment Toole got here, he's been a high effort, try to do everything right, pour himself into everything he does guy. So he's going to be someone who's going to really push. You talk about the competition. You're trying to figure out which of these edge rushers can kind of break through the mold and earn themselves a spot in playing time this year, because you don't have Vinny Curry right now on the roster. He's a free agent. Brandon Graham's getting up there in age. The Eagles did exercise a 5th-year option on Derek Barnett, but they need to really figure out the depth there. Toohill is going to push and push and push, and at the very least, he's going to make those guys, whoever does make the team, a whole lot better.
All right, let's go to the undrafted free agents, guys. We're just going to kind of breeze through. I don't think we have as many notes on all of these guys as we do on the drafted players. But,
that's what you think.
The first one we're going to hit, Ben, I know you want to wax poetic on Raekwon Williams. We talked about him a bunch this past season. We talked about him even the year before as well. Talk about Raekwon Williams, the defensive tackle from Michigan State.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player. Redshirt senior there, 6'3", 300 pounds. I've seen him 3 times, once each of the last 3 seasons. Played out there in the Big Ten at Michigan State. He's a guy I remember watching with you, Fran, over the summer, and we really like his tools and his play personality. We just didn't really know what he was going to be at the next level. I have it written down. Is he a 1 tech? Is he a 3 tech? Is he a 3-4 defensive end? There's a lot of kind of fits and plans for this guy. I think his best football could still be ahead of him. And I have notes written down from his defensive line coach, Ron Burton, who played in the NFL for a number of years. I asked him what he needed to work on over the summer. And he said, man, we just really need to get him better getting after the quarterback, work on the pressures, get that quarterback off his spot, convert from playing the run to the pass, especially on play action. So that's really his makeup. He's a guy that's held his hat being a run stopper and a run defender on early downs. Not a whole lot of production getting after the quarterback. That was mostly Kenny Willekes off the edge and Shirley Calhoun a couple years ago. But he's a guy that's really strong, can hold the point for you. And I think if you could get him out on the edge, maybe on a 3 tech and being Fletcher's backup, that might be his most advantageous position at the next level. I'm not sure his size and frame, and he's a little leggy, a little high cut. To be a 1 tech at 300 pounds, I'm a little bit concerned with. But some names I've written down, like Willie Henry, Montravis Adams, Vincent Taylor, some guys that are very versatile defensive linemen in college that carved out roles and niches in the NFL, and I think Raekwon can as well.
I actually wrote down Malik Collins watching Raekwon. I felt
that's a great pick too, Fran. That's perfect. That's the exact style of player.
Yeah, to me, like I felt, especially Malik coming out of Nebraska. I mean, he was a 3rd-round pick by the Cowboys and turned into a quick starter for them. And to me, like I looked at Raekwon, I said, okay, is he all the way there yet as a pass rusher? No, but this is a guy that can come in, defend the run, be a nice nose shade. And I ended up saying that he'd be more of a backup, and I feel like that's what he can be, a nice rotational player on the interior. He's got 1 and 3 flexibility. We'll see how he competes with the interior defensive lineman. To me, this was a draftable prospect that the Eagles got for certain. Cmac, any thoughts there on Raekwon Williams before we move on?
Yeah, we got to see him at the Shrine Bowl down there, and definitely agree with the sentiment that, he's someone that definitely belongs on an NFL roster. Overcame some hardships in Chicago, escaped the gang violence there, to be a team captain for the Spartans, was 3 times named the winner of the team's Ironman Award. So someone who's been very productive, high character, the intangibles. It's another – everybody's talking about the speed element, but really it seems like when it goes to the character intangibles, that's another thing that's really becoming prevalent. And this goes back to what Harry Roseman said at the end of last season, that they had the 3 things written down, and it's, can the guy play? Is he healthy? And does he love the game of football? Those are the 3 main characteristics going back to the end of the season. And Raekwon Williams definitely coming through with the character and intangibles portion of it.
And Fran, I don't know if it's just my Ike Reese love. I just have a little bit of an infatuation with Michigan State defenders. I don't know what it is. They just seem to always kind of be in the right spot. They don't wow you, but they're guys you just want on your team, whether it's, Joe Bocci or Kari Willis last year or Kenny Willekes. And there's a lot of good players coming out of that program.
You're just sucking up to Ike. I
hope you're listening, Ike. Hope you're listening.
Yeah, we'll check. We'll know if he hits you up on Twitter. All right, so a couple of running backs here. Michael Warren, the running back from Cincinnati, kind of known as a physical slasher, has torn up the AAC over the last couple of years, and then staying in that conference, kind of a complementary skill set with Adrian Killins, a guy that Cmac, you and I got to see him down at the East-West Shrine Bowl. And this guy's lightning in a bottle, really explosive, jitterbug athlete, can be used in a lot of different ways, both in the slot and in the backfield as a pass catcher, perimeter runs. I liked Adrian Killins on film. Ben, give us your thoughts on those 2 guys in the backfield.
Michael Warren's a big, big boy. I'm really excited to see what his role is going to be. He could be the kind of incumbent starter that take over that Jordan Howard role, that kind of between the tackles bruiser, and let Miles Sanders be the perimeter back. What a lot of people don't realize, coming into 2019, he was a top 5 as far as scrimmage yards the previous season, right up there with Jonathan Taylor, Eno Benjamin, Travis Etienne, J.J. Taylor, and Michael Warren. This is a guy that was very productive at Cincinnati. He had 20 touchdowns in 2018. This guy was not a fluke. He wasn't as productive this past year, although Cincinnati made it all the way to the American Championship game, losing to Memphis, unfortunately. But he's a big physical back that's churned up a lot of yardage, has a nose for the end zone. And if he's a guy that the Eagles want to give 10 to 13 carries a game and really be that bowling ball between the tackles that we know we like, whether it was a Jordan Howard, a LeGarrette Blount, whoever it is, you need that physical presence, and that's going to be Michael Warren.
C-Mac, any thoughts on these 2 backs?
I mean, I'll start with Warren there. Harry Roseman said they did have a draftable grade on Warren and said he'll be very much in the competition with Elijah Holyfield for, as Ben mentioned, who's going to be that big back, that Jordan Howard type role. And I just think back to a couple of years ago, the Eagles had a lot of success with a rookie free agent back in Corey Clement. We were watching the extended highlights of the Super Bowl when he had 100 yards in that game. So it just brought back some of the memories there. But very, very productive Warren. Added 51 receptions. So he can catch the ball in the backfield as well. And going back to his time in high school, he was Mr. Football for the state of Ohio in high school. So certainly has the pedigree. And then Killen's a touchdown machine, 34 total touchdowns in his career. Just an absolute dynamo. We saw that speed at the Shrine Bowl. Again, just another blazing speed option here. But, you wonder if the Eagles are going to try to find someone. I'm not going to compare him to Darren Sproles, but someone who can have that playmaking ability with Sproles now retired.
He's my vote for the camp ooh and ah guy. He's going to be that guy late in practice. So you just hear the rumbles on the sideline. Ooh. And I know he's going to carve some people up. I don't know if he has the long speed to survive in the NFL with those little legs, but he is so wickedly fast in and out of breaks and a sneaky good receiver. They stopped giving him the ball late in his career at UCF, but early on they like to get him the ball at the backfield. And I know Doug Peterson likes that as well. So he's going to be watching Miles Sanders in front of him.
So the Eagles select 3 receivers in the draft. They add 2 more in undrafted free agency. First off, Manasseh Bailey, the wide receiver from Morgan State. I got the lowdown on him from some friends on the coaching staff there. This guy's got legit 4.4 speed, low 4.4 speed, can be used vertically, was a big play weapon for the Bears down there in Baltimore, but also an outstanding special teamer, blocked a bunch of kicks throughout the course of his career. To me, and this was the point I wanted to bring up with those speed receivers earlier, special teams is going to be huge here this summer. It's going to be huge in the preseason because to me, when you look at, let's just look at the numbers at the receiving core, right? We know you have Deshaun Jackson, you've got Greg Ward, you've got Alshon Jeffrey, you've got Jalen Rieger, you've got J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, you've got these guys all that are incumbents. Now you throw in John Hightower and Quez Watkins. These guys have to be able to make it on special teams if they're going to try and make a run at this roster, whether the Eagles keep 5, whether they keep 6. Could Manasseh Bailey come in and kind of cause some ripples here? Because I feel like with a guy with that special teams background, having that track speed, having that long speed, he certainly could play a factor. And then the Eagles add a converted quarterback as well in Khalil Tate, longtime starter out there for the Wildcats in Arizona, makes the move over from the quarterback position. Very athletic kid, has created some big plays, had some awesome highlights over the course of his career as a ball carrier and a playmaker for the Wildcats. But thoughts on those 2 guys being added to the roster? Ben, we'll go to you.
Not a whole lot on your Morgan State guy. I feel like your lowdown was pretty good. I decided to skip him, but Khalil Tate's a really interesting player, and obviously his career at Arizona at the quarterback position probably didn't go as planned down the stretch there, but an absolute dynamic athlete with the ball in his hands. I would challenge anybody just to throw on his YouTube highlights, especially his freshman season, where everybody thought he might be that next Russell Wilson, Johnny Manziel run through college football. Really interesting player, pretty short stature. He's going to have to convert himself like Greg Ward had and some other guys, but really interesting just to see what he can do on the field and special teams and whether he could be more dynamic running routes or as a returner, or do we just get the ball in his hands? And at the end of the day, he seems like he knows what to do when that ball is in his hands.
Cmac, just add receivers,
Yeah, Tate will be interesting because you mentioned Greg Ward. Greg Ward was at times a wide receiver at Houston, so it wasn't completely brand new. Tate doesn't have that wide receiver experience at Arizona. The only thing I'll add on Bailey was a linebacker to start his college career, so he converted from linebacker to wide receiver during his time there at Morgan State, and just came 4 yards shy of 1,000 yards in 2019.
All right, so a couple more guys here to round out the offensive side of the football. First, you got Oregon State tight end Noah Togiai, who I don't know too much about. Ben, I'm going to rely on you here for Togiai. And then Western Michigan center Luke Juriga, who was down at the Shrine Bowl, undersized, athletic kid on the interior. Somebody's going to come in and compete. Ben, let's go to you for Togiai and Juriga.
So Togiai is an athletic kind of move tight end. He didn't play in line a whole lot. Pretty underwhelming as far as blocking, even out in space blocking. Just can't seem to latch and stay on. But he's a guy that gets up the top speed really well, caught 100 passes at Oregon, has a basketball background. Yep. Reminds me a little bit of Ed Dixon, who's a third-round pick, and that kind of vertical presence, much more of a pass game target anything in the run game, but we'll see what he can do, maybe being that 4th or 5th tight end and sneak himself on in special teams.
C-Mac, any thoughts on these 2 guys, Juriga and Togiai?
Oh, I got Juriga as well. I forgot about him.
And then Ben, what about Juriga?
So Juriga's really interesting. So he's an undersized center, a little bit like at Tennessee at Temple, under 300 pounds. At Western Michigan, but he's an experienced player, first-team All-MAC the past 2 years, actually played some right guard early in his career. His dad played in the NFL with the Broncos Super Bowl team in the 90s there. But he's a guy that paved the way for this dynamic running back, Levante Bellamy, and his back 1,000-yard seasons. And like Matt Hennessy, Juriga, Jason Kelsey, great initial quickness, especially in a zone scheme. Really good kind of stocky frame to seal off blockers on the second level or reach blocks on 3-techs and things like that. Quick out of his stance. My comp, actually, I didn't realize I had this written down, is Stefan Wisniewski. If that's kind of a mold on what we're getting there with that style of player, that guard center, really just good depth piece for any offensive line room.
C-Mac, do you have anything on here on Togiai and Juriga?
Juriga, team captain, started all 52 games of his career, 2-time first-team All-MAC selection. So certainly the pedigree there. Togiai, just over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns for his career. A lot of starting experience, was a second-team all-conference selection there at Oregon State for the Beavers.
So let's go back 7 here. We're going to go linebacker Donte Olson from Montana. He's a guy I've talked about often. I actually talked about him in our linebacker preview as a guy on day 3 to keep an eye out for. He played for Tim Houck's brother, the Eagles safety coach, former Eagle legend, Tim Houck at safety. He played for Bobby Houck at Montana. This is a guy who's instinctive, really productive over the last 2 years. Donte Olson, a guy, I'm glad the Eagles were able to get him an undrafted free agency. I thought he was a draftable player at the linebacker spot. Ben, any thoughts here on Donte Olson?
No, I think you hit them all. I know he went to the Shrine game. He's out in Montana. I think one day I fired up his tape, and then something happened, and I never got back to it. And I remember reading your Philly connection on the Combine preview to Tim Houck, like you had just mentioned. And then I felt pretty good about his evaluation. So, I don't have a whole lot on Donte Olson. The Montana tape did not come in early this year.
Cmac, what are your thoughts on Olson? We got Sam up close at St. Petersburg.
Yeah, just very decorated career. Won the Buck Buchanan Award, the best defensive player in the FCS. You mentioned the Tim Houck, Bobby Houck connection there. Certainly something to watch. It's just another good piece to add for it's going to be a very good competition at linebacker this summer.
So 3 DBs to round this out, guys. Graylin Arnold, the corner, some see him as a safety out of Baylor. Had a really good workout out of the Combine. Cmac, you and I highlighted him after watching him live in Indianapolis. Elijah Riley, the safety, he played some corner at Army. Cmac, he stood out to us down at the Shrine Bowl. And then Prince Smith, the defensive back as well. All 3 of these guys. Ben, we'll go to you. Any thoughts on these 3 defensive backs?
I got you guys covered because I know you guys got nothing here, right? Graylin Arnold was one of the 2 Baylor defensive backs that went to the Combine.
Yep.
So I watched his tape. He's the nickel presence on the Matt Rule's defense out there. Not a whole lot of speed, ran 4.59, but I think that's enough with his toughness. He's a little undersized at 5'9", 106. He's pretty fearless in blitzing and run support. We'll just see what he can do against some NFL slot receivers. Now, if this is the right Prince Smith that I'm seeing from UNH, he's also from Philadelphia. He's from Ematil.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure we had the right player here, Prince Smith. There might be a couple of those going around the country. But another guy, another corner that's a little bit undersized, of really good ball skills and special team ability, had 3 picks this past year. And what we love from defensive backs, Fran, guys that get their hands on the ball, not only in picks, but forcing fumbles. And he seems like he had forced fumbles every year in his college career. He had 2 this past year. So another guy that we'll see if he can squeeze his way on and maybe be in that 6th or 7th defensive back for our defensive back room.
Cmac, any thoughts on that trio?
Riley, I could envision him playing a safety, has that versatility, real tough, hard-nosed, was a team captain at Army, so another good piece to add to the mix. And Prince Smith started Imhotep Charter, and he was part of the first Philadelphia Public League school team to win a state title before going on to New Hampshire, where he was a 3-year starter. So nice trio there to add to the mix.
And just really quick, Fran, Elijah Riley. So the other 2 are pretty small. Elijah Riley's a freight train. He is a thick defensive back. He's 6 foot. It's listed 205. He might be closer to 210 or 215. So in a much different mold than the other 2.
And watching him practice down at the Shrine Bowl, he is an Energizer bunny. He was flying all over the place and making plays. In fact, I talked with Bobby Taylor over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast when we were down there in St. Petersburg. And afterwards, because he was down there coaching the DBs for one of the teams. And I said, hey, what do you think about these guys? Anybody standing out to you? He brought up 2 names. One of the 2 names was Elijah Riley. So you get a backing there from an Eagles legend and cornerback Bobby Taylor. All right, guys. That's it. That's everybody that the Eagles added over the course of the weekend from the college football ranks. Really, really fun weekend again over on Eagles Draft Central with Amy Campbell, Ross Tucker, Dave Spadaro. We did it. I thought had a lot of fun. The 3 of us as well, recapping every night of the draft. We've got a few questions, and then we're going to cut loose here. It's time for Draft Mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, guys, so the 2020 journey to the draft is over. As I mentioned at the top of the show, things are going to go a little bit different over the next couple of weeks, and we'll get into some more draft recaps down the road, and then we'll start getting our eye towards 2021. But I wanted to get a few more questions here answered. And these are going to be really quick. Real quickly, again, the best way is to throw us your support. If you listened all year round, just take a few seconds, go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Tim Richard, 718, said he started listening last season. He's never paid this much attention to pre-draft coverage before, but he was so excited, especially for the later rounds of the draft because he knew so many names. He actually wrote a previous review, and Cmac, you asked on the podcast if he had become an Eagles fan when Andre Dillard was drafted since he lived in Washington State. He said he's been a fan since 2009, the year Michael Vick was signed. He was his favorite player growing up. Thanks for the show, guys. Every single episode was amazing. So, Tim, thanks so much for the extra rating. CMart923 saying, was asking about the Jalen Hertz pick. So, CMart, I wanted to make sure we did not ignore the fact that you asked the question, but I hope that all of our analysis we gave a little bit earlier in the show covered that. And I would say the same thing to RJ Field, who also left a question saying, hey, you guys have done such a great job of highlighting what all these players can do, which I agree is more important. But now that the draft is over, can you play devil's advocate and talk about which aspects of these guys' games the players need to work on? And I thought Ben did a great job of really going right down the middle, offering, look, all these guys have flaws, right? Otherwise, all of them would be the number one pick in the draft. So what are the things they need to work on moving forward into the NFL? I thought Ben did a great job throughout the course of this podcast, really highlighting both the positives and the negatives. So good question there from RJ Field. Really appreciate that from all of you guys. Now, I've got one more that I'm going to hit you with here, guys, because I did not put this in the rundown. So we have a mock draft for 2021. Eagles mock draft, 3 picks. I'm throwing them at you right now. Ben, wide receiver Devontae Smith from Alabama. Eagles add more speed in the first round in 2021. Asante Samuel Jr., the corner from Florida State in the second round. And then Jack Anderson, the guard from Texas Tech in the third round. Ben, grade this mock draft on, April 29th here of 2020.
I wish you could see my face. I'm looking left and right, through traffic here, mock draft 2020. Whose names are these? Whose draft is this? Devontae Smith, I've heard of him. Asante Samuel, he's on the list. Jack Anderson, he was at O-line Masterminds with us last year at Texas Tech. Interesting player. After Devontae Smith, I think I'm just drunk after hearing that name. So he's obviously one of the more dynamic receivers in a deep receiver class once again next year. It's absolutely loaded. Obviously, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle at Alabama, but Jamar Chase at LSU. A lot of interesting players. Justin Ross at Clemson. After Devontae Smith, I don't really care what you said, Fran. He's a dynamic receiving option that any team would covet.
Yeah, it's we'll be hitting all these mock drafts for sure.
Wait, whose mock draft is this?
Oh, this is from that's a good point. I got one. It was actually on Twitter right before we went to air from @Pete Nathan, who's a longtime follower, a longtime listener to the podcast. Said, I'm already looking forward to next year's draft. Great job this year with the draft coverage. Do you know if there's any internships? So he asked for internship opportunities, but sent a mock draft, so I wanted to make sure we covered it.
I love that.
Good job. I love it.
That's it.
Here's my thing.
This is the journey to the draft. This isn't a journey back to the draft, Fran. Quit trying to pull us back to 2020. That was so last week. All right, it's full steam ahead. 2021. Devontae Smith breakdowns coming up.
I just want to know, does Asante Samuel Jr. have the same swagger as his dad?
I think
of course he does.
That's hard to miss out on. I feel like that gene definitely is strong in Gary's.
Hey, I wonder if Tim Richard out there in Washington State knows that we also have River Craycraft on the roster.
Oh.
A lot of Eagles fans may not know who that is, but he was a dynamic receiver out there in Washington State that I bet Tim Richard's a fan of.
You're just flexing at this point. All right.
I'm trying.
All right, guys. Let's wrap this up. Last time the three of us will be together here for a podcast until we get to training camp. We'll be over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast every single day out there once practice starts, hopefully once practice starts later this summer. But Cmac, as always, thanks so much for all of your contributions this draft season. Ben, we'll be back here in a couple weeks with you. The next couple of weeks, these are some of my favorite episodes. We started them last year with our journey to the draft for all the draft choices for the Eagles. Jalen Rieger is next week. So all the times we talked about Jalen Rieger throughout the course of the college football season and the pre-draft process, we'll kind of give you a little bit of a peek into how Jalen Rieger became an Eagle. So we'll do all that next week. But guys, it was fun. This was a lot of fun. And we'll be back again. Like I said, once the Eagle season ends, Cmac will be back into the fold, and all three of us will be back here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Until then, we'll see you next week.